Here we're going to look at human blood. And human blood is composed of formed elements, which are cells and little bits of cells that we call platelets, that are all suspended in a matrix, a special type of matrix. It's a fluid matrix that has globular proteins dissolved in it, so things like globulins and albumins. And we have a special name for this matrix in blood. We call it plasma. So we've got formed elements in plasma, and we have to remember that blood is one of our two fluid connective tissues, the other one being lymph, but we're not going to look at lymph in the lab. We're just going to look at blood. And here we see the zoomed out view of blood. So now I'm going to change our focus to the low power objective here. And now we can begin to see the main type of blood cell, the erythrocyte, which looks a little bit like pink donuts. And these are red blood cells. And we see that we have mostly red blood cells, and all the white background is the plasma. We'll see an occasional white blood cell here. And there are 5 types of white blood cells. But for this semester, we're only going to make you recognize that they are white blood cells. We're not going to make you differentiate between the 5 types. One of the first things that we should note is a huge difference between red blood cells, these erythrocytes here, and white blood cells, is red blood cells have no nuclei. These are specialized oxygen-carrying machines. They have very little by way of cellular machinery, and they have no nucleus. They cannot reproduce themselves, and so they wear out after a fairly short period of time, about 120 days or so. Now, if we look at this guy over here, this is a white blood cell, and we'll zoom in to our high power objective here. And we will see, on close inspection, the erythrocytes really do look kind of like pink donuts. In this case, these are probably in a little bit hypotonic solution, and some of them have swelled a little bit and have probably taken on some water. But nevertheless, they still retain this kind of pink donut shape. And that's due to the fact that these are like little discs that are thick on the outside, get progressively thinner in the center. And while the center is not hollow, it's not a hole in the middle, it's very, very thin. And so that's what gives erythrocytes this kind of pink donut shape. And here you can see one that's sort of turned up on end. And what we will see if we look at them in cross-section is they have a kind of a curved shape that gets really thin in the middle and thick at the ends. So let's look around. We can see some of these little purple things, and these little purple things are platelets. These are itsy bitsy, teeny weeny little polka dots, purple polka dots that are interspersed throughout the formed elements in the matrix, which we call plasma and blood. And they're much, much smaller than any cells. These are not cells themselves. These are little packets, membrane-bound packets of cytoplasm that were shed off from a huge cell in bone marrow called a megakaryocyte. You'll get to that next semester. But for now, suffice it to say, these little small purple things are platelets, and they are essential for blood clotting. And that is to stop the flow of blood should there be an injury. And should you have a leakage of blood through a blood vessel wall, these little platelets can come to the aid of the body in basically creating a little plug, a plug that blocks that cut or that area that is allowing blood to escape, because obviously blood loss would be bad. Now, we also have, so we can identify 2 of our major things we need to be able to identify in blood, are platelets and our erythrocytes. And remember, we're going to use the term erythrocyte in here rather than red blood cell. If we look around, we'll see that we have some white blood cells too. And these are few and far between compared to the red blood cells. And we saw a nice one earlier, and now I'm just looking for another one. And here we see a really nice white blood cell. And typically they're larger than red blood cells, but not necessarily. And they do have these dark staining, typically purple nuclei. And the nuclei can be anywhere from a giant circle that takes up most of the space inside the cell, and it looks like a big eye looking at you, to these what we call polymorphonuclear, meaning they have multiple lobes and are kind of oddly shaped. But in any case, we'll get into the 5 different types of white blood cells next semester. Suffice it to say that the white blood cells are fairly easy to recognize because they're quite different from the erythrocytes, and they're quite a bit larger, obviously, than the platelets, and they have these dark staining nuclei. So that's the way to identify a white blood cell, is you'll see these dark staining nuclei. The background of the white blood cell, or I should say the cytoplasm of the white blood cell, can range into almost pale to a very pretty orangey red color to very dark blue, depending on the type of white blood cell we're looking at. So once again, we have our erythrocytes, we have a white blood cell, we have platelets, and we have the plasma, which is the specialized matrix that we see in blood.